Normally at these events, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Dukakis. But Mike is unable to be with us this morning. We got an email from him about an hour ago that his wife Kitty is not feeling well, and she's somewhat frail, and he was reluctant to leave her alone through the morning. So Mike is not going to be joining us. I'm going to try to do the moderation of this day. Kind of thrust on me at the last minute by Juan, so I'm not Michael Dukakis, but I'll do the best that I can. And Mike is going to call and wants to say a few words before we start. Juan, is Mike on? Go ahead. Or maybe just call him.
Hello, Mike. Yes, you welcome. And yes, conference already listen your voice and your talk. Yes, we are very sad to hear about Kitty, and we look forward and we wish the best wishes to Kitty. Until now, you can talk with conference a little bit. Yeah, and we also invite Consul General to sit and to talk with you also this afternoon. And now, just Michael, please. If you help, yeah.
Folks, I'm awfully sorry about this. I love these conferences and I love what we're doing. So, firing work that Juan and our staff do that it really kills me. But Kitty's had a very rough 3 weeks on the health front since we came back here. She began developing serious back pain in Los Angeles back in February. She had had 2 back surgeries 10, 12 years ago, which were quite successful. And then it started again, and had it treated with shots and those kinds of things, which didn't do much. So we came back here looking forward to getting treatment here. And then of all things, at a big Greek event at the State House, which I started when I was governor, which involves the transfer of the law of Greece from Greece to the Boston Athletic Association for the winners of the marathon. She began experiencing severe abdominal pain. We spent the whole night at the emergency room at the Faulkner Hospital, and it turned out she had kidney stones. So she's been dealing with that. Was operated on for about a week ago. And we're scheduled to see the doctor at the Brigham this afternoon, hopefully, to have the thing finished up and her back in shape, her back, but to get her back in shape when it comes to the kidney thing. But it's been very, very difficult. And overnight, this past night, she was a little disoriented and great pain. And I just, much as it kills me, I just couldn't leave her. So I apologize for that because I was so looking forward to our discussion and welcoming a number of really excellent people, including Consul General and friends. And I think this is the first time I've ever missed one of our scheduled events, so I'm particularly apologetic. But I was just so concerned about her condition last night and even early this morning that I just couldn't leave her. So I'm sorry about that, and I hope she and I also get back on track soon. But we'll get a full report from the surgeons after the program, and I hope it's going to be a good one. So yeah, she can get on with the job of trying to deal with her back problem. So I'll be there when we want to start, but it's the best I can do.
And I like that we talk with Consul General. Yeah, you can talk with him.
Ja сказал, co stoi w tej sytuacji z zajęciem spędzają. No, wygląda to nie sposób.
Thank you so much, Mike, and let's see to please. Thank you so much. Yes, as you know, we have a home chair and yes, and on behalf of you present our AI Society present some initiative to friends and government on behalf of my consultant mentioned here. Yes, so Tom, you on behalf of you to present, and also Tom, you on behalf of you to we might be honor to be seen on the Panama Internet. Yeah, as a only the AI Society. Thank you so much, Mike.
So I need this guy because I'm not all that familiar with the agenda. The agenda. So Mike has already missed, obviously. They got about a minute and a half and haven't said anything. But we have some congratulatory remarks from Nam Pham, who's the Massachusetts Assistant Secretary of Business Development and International Trade.
Good morning. This is a real honor for me to be here this morning on behalf of our most popular governor in America, Governor Baker. But also it's a real honor for me to be here. I was hoping that I could see the governor campus. I would have been here this morning. I would not be in America. If it was not for the people, the great people, the passionate people like Lukatis and his wife. Many of you know that I am a former refugee from Vietnam. And this month is basically 44 years that we came to America. And Lukatis and his wife during the Indies were among those people who actively and personally welcome refugees to Massachusetts. And he also, in his life, visited refugee camps in Southeast Asia and sponsored Cambodians and Vietnamese refugees coming to Massachusetts. So I hope that Mrs. Lukatis will have a very speedy report. And also, I like again to say thank you for their passion and generosity. This morning we are here to talk about AI. At first, I'd like to congratulate Tom for bringing us together. This is the fourth anniversary that we do this, and it's getting better and better. Regarding AI, I am not an expert. I know much about AI, but I know that we are all excited about the possibilities. We also feel a little apprehensive, scared that artificial intelligence is something that we will see in every aspect of life. It will not only AI is not industry, but it's something that will be part of our life very much. And being in this room, in this university, we know that one of the great power of people here from different countries, we will tackle AI without issue, just like we have used other technology. But think that it's so linked personally more that AI is human intelligence. AI is being created by human intelligence, but whether or not we are intelligent enough to manage it in a way that it will improve our life and it would not be a tool for government or individuals to use to oppress our freedom or cause more misery for human beings. I think that's the key issue. So therefore, I think the Boston Global Forum over the last many years has tried to bring attention, has tried to remind us that certain standards, certain principles, and many things that we should consider. So I congratulate for your vision. I would also like to share with you a little bit about Massachusetts progress in AI. I first heard about AI about 35 years ago when I was a student here. And fast forward to now, we also talk more and more about AI. 35 years is still a new thing. And if you become newer and newer, because the possibilities is endless. Number one. Number two, Massachusetts is also ranked number 2 in America regarding development AI, the investment that we made into AI, the number of companies that engage in AI, the age of people of Massachusetts who are working in AI. That's one example of how Massachusetts ecosystem of innovation has helped us to be one of the leaders. One of the benefits of my job is the opportunity to meet and engage in discussion with people from different countries. This morning we had a number of distinguished diplomats joining us here. I often been asked what is the secret of Massachusetts that helps Massachusetts to be number one in innovation. And we can talk about we have a wonderful education system where we sit. There are over 2 hours drive from where we sit. There are over 100 colleges and universities. We have a number of world-class companies that bring the people, bring the talent into here. But that's not very unique at all. All the other countries also have a lot of good universities, a lot of good technology. For me, the secret of the success of Massachusetts is our people. We have a very diverse group of people, not just from different backgrounds, different level of education, but the people who come to Massachusetts, number one, they are respected. If you look back almost 40 years, the people took a risk to come to America. But taking risk is not good enough if the environment, the ecosystem does not allow you to use the talent. So therefore, you need to have a place that allow you to freely think about your idea to really do what you plan to do, what you want to become. The U.S. national anthem, LR 1, sentence very much. Home, land of the free, home of the brave. In Massachusetts, we have brave people who are taking risks to do the new things. So AI will help us to improve our life, to improve our government. And it can help us because here we have that type of people. And all of you sitting here are representatives of the wonderful brave power, the wonderful diverse people that we have in Massachusetts. So that I again welcome to Massachusetts. Welcome all of you from Vietnam and other to Massachusetts. We hope that Massachusetts will be a home for you, and we hope that your help will help Massachusetts to remain #1 state in innovation. One of the best ways to live in America, and the best way for all of us to get together to improve our life. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Western.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next, each year, this conference is really built around trying to do G7 summit. And this year, the G7 will be held in France. And we're honored to have with us today who's the France's Consul General in Boston, and to share with us some remarks.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, distinguished audience, Vietnam found Assistant Secretary for Business Development of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a long-time partner of the French Consulate. Dear Antoine, dear Emily and Antoine, the CEO of the Boston Global Forum, distinguished professors, I'm very pleased to be with you to discuss this crucial issue of artificial intelligence. It has been one of France's priorities among the global challenges that we should address collectively as artificial intelligence is not thought of in a purely national context. So I want to give you some insight on the way we see that issue in the system context. First, allow me to say on it. Thank you so much everyone for asking me to make a 30-minute speech on artificial intelligence. That's very challenging task. I didn't find actually any speech writing software based on AI. So I think that's the view of people as I was saying. So I tried to think on a very simple structure. First, to give you our assessment of the opportunities and the challenges involved in artificial intelligence. Second, on France's strategy, as it was laid out by another very famous speech by President Macron on 29 March 2018, which is actually the basis of the efforts that are currently ongoing in the G7 context. It's an international initiative that's always been promoted for now 2 years, in particular in the G7 framework. Defining artificial intelligence is not easy. Since its origins as a specific field of research in the middle of the 20th century, it has always constituted a broader incessantly pushed back. Artificial intelligence refers less to a well-defined field of research than to a program based on an ambitious objective, understand how human cognition and functions, and how to reproduce, to duplicate cognitive processes comparable to those of humans. The field is therefore extremely wide, both in terms of the technical procedures used and the disciplines involved. We're talking about mathematical computer science, cognitive sciences, and IA methods are very diverse: ontological, learning by reinforcement, adversarial learning, neural networks. And they're not new. Many of the algorithms that we use today were developed several decades ago. But in recent years, artificial intelligence has entered a new era. This has been a very promising development, which gives rise to many hopes. And it was a very big moment this morning that the Michael spoke about his wife. We all know that AI opens myriad of possibilities in the health field, which is so very awesome. And so we see that those opportunities really were thankful. Made possible by new algorithms, by the multiplication of data sets, and the tenfold increase in power of calculation. We see applications that are multiplying. It's about translation, it's about autonomous cars, it's about cancer detection. The AI development takes place in this massive context of datafication of the world, which covers all domains and all sectors. Robotics, blockchain, supercomputing, and massive storage. The result is that now artificial intelligence will play a much more important role than the one it had been playing. It's going to become one of the keys of the world to come. Indeed, we are in a digital world, a world of data, which are at the heart of the function of artificial intelligence. This is programmed to foster, over time, our ability to organize knowledge, to give access to it, and to increase our decision-making processes and our system control skills. In this challenge, France has been an important actor thanks to our long-standing tradition with mathematics. We already have talent, we have excellence in training. Cédric Villani, who's just written a very important report on artificial intelligence, and many other fields that testify of this long tradition. And as a review of mathematics that is so important to French data. We have with Europe in general, beyond Europe, and we want to build excellence in this field. You can see the results of French researchers and realization in synthetic images and in the most advanced theories that have allowed the technological expression effect. There's a great example of this with the headquarters of the Dassault System, the global leader of the 3D localization, which headquarters are in Malta, Massachusetts, for North America. So in France, we have research which is open for Samsung, Fujitsu, and Identify, Google, or Facebook. These are clear signs of the capacity of our laboratories, schools, and universities to enhance, maintain, and at least this long-standing tradition for mathematics in France. In terms of data, France too has an edge thanks to its massive centralized databases. Sometimes France is being criticized for being too centralized. That's what we call Chaco. It has actually a positive aspect that we should underline. We have highly centralized databases, in particular in the health system, and this is a clear asset to develop AI systems. These databases are one of the most important in the world, and it provides us with major scientific discoveries. So let me describe the challenges of artificial intelligence as we see it. AI revolution will not happen in 50 or 60 years' time. It is happening right now. The new opportunities are being offered to us, choices are already before us. And we need to decide if we want to pursue certain paths of innovation. Should we put limits? Or should we open or not possibilities that are offered to us? So in his speech that he delivered on 29 March 2018 at the Collège de France, University of Paris, Sciences de l'État, PSL, President Macron refers to an almost Promethean option because he considers that artificial intelligence gives us the ability to perform infinite calculation ourselves. Indeed, through learning machines, we are now increasingly able to travel much faster than paths of misfortune, and in the end, to choose the right path much quicker, and much earlier, and much faster. So it's an enormous responsibility that we have in our hands. And in his speech, President Macron actually set some basic principles. The first principle we need to agree on is that we should not be afraid and refuse change. I think it's crucially important because you will hear many French people talk about the challenges of AI. I think here there's a linguistic aspect. For us, challenges is actually positive. Défi in French is something we need to overcome. We see it as a very positive, I guess it's a tradition that dates back to Napoleon. But I understand that in English, you should always add opportunities and challenges to insist on the positive aspect of artificial intelligence. So allow me always to refer to challenges, but bear in mind that these are opportunities. Because indeed, our president said that we need absolutely to open the way for all the innovation, the best innovations that artificial intelligence make possible. Secondly, he implied that it should not be naive and consider that change and technological innovation will itself bring the conditions for its own recognition. And therefore, we should not believe that AI will bring its own articulation with the community. We all know this is not true. For in many other fields, we live in a world that is full of the excesses linked to the negative externalities of the global changes. And climate change is a very important example of that. With those principles in mind, Macron defined the strategy with three main objectives. This strategy was inspired by the goal written by Céline Lamy, so one of our main mathematicians, now member of our National Assembly, and the president, the chair of our Office for Scientific Issues International. So the first objective is to prove to us, that is France and Europe, because we don't make decisions nowadays between France and Europe. We really see ourselves as a driving force, also part of that exciting project which is Europe. Which put us in a position to build, or rather to strengthen, the artificial intelligence ecosystem in France and Europe. In particular, with regards to talent. To that end, the National Programme for Artificial Intelligence has been defined. It is a large network connected to the French university research ecosystem as a whole, and monitored by our meeting and quite famous research institution in computer science, which is INRIA. The second axis is about data. We will develop strong axis of data evidence in order to encourage the emergence of France and in Europe of the champions of artificial intelligence. I will be back to that because it's really a key issue. And our third objective is to create common ground and an international model to foster the necessary discussion on political and ethical issues related to artificial intelligence. We need to initiate common reflection, common rules, common understandings, and basically common approach among powers of goodwill. Artificial intelligence, as I said, is a transnational essence. It all depends on a certain size of the market. So the question is before us if there is in the world any large economy that will be large enough to define itself the next rules of artificial intelligence, or whether it should be a coalition of economies that can define it. All the question is between is to choose between being a non-starter or a non-taker industry. Let me give one example which is absolutely key when it comes to artificial intelligence, and that is data protection. At the same time as we open the data, which, as I said, is key in our strategy to develop European and French champions in the field of artificial intelligence, we need to think about the law framework. Because one of the challenges of artificial intelligence is precisely to make a clear distinction between the use of aggregated data on the one hand and the intrusion into personal data on the other hand. And we firmly believe in France that a clear line can be drawn between these two aspects. It is not true that the use of aggregated data involves intrusion into personal data. It is up to us as lawmakers, as experts, as companies, to find and to strike appropriate balance between these two legitimate concerns. This requires circumstantial regulations, which, without preventing scientific developments, preserve anonymity and what is the secret of the individual. So the European Union has done tremendous work on this, and we hail the action of Europe in that field. With its general data protection regulation, the EU has defined a very clear position at the end of a very complex process to take on board all the concerns and all the legitimate interests. It entered into force in May 2018. And it has some results. But in France, we think we should go further. We must take next steps to build a common understanding that will make it possible to open up data control by ensuring the protection of each individual. We want a framework that allows all industries and innovators to develop fully their activities and their potential, but at the same time, that is transparent and fair to each citizen. Data protection is only one aspect of the question. Recently, many other questions have emerged in the public debate about the impact of artificial intelligence. We should not immediately think in terms of regulation, but a profound reflection remains necessary today to better understand the upheavals of tomorrow. Digital actors are gradually moving in this direction. We see that Google is beginning to recruit philosophers. University research centers on internet law are heading on ethical research dimensions. And more generally, an interdisciplinary approach is now more prevalent when it comes to discussing artificial intelligence. As Emile Durkheim proposes, it is a question of giving architects of tomorrow's society the conceptual tools to identify and responsibly confront the ethical and moral problems. To give you concrete examples, the Cultural Service of Microsoft in general have been working in collaboration with Boston University for a series of workshops on the implications of artificial intelligence and the interdisciplinary approach that we could adopt. The first conference on artificial intelligence entitled Getting to Know You, what are the prospects for people's emotional relationships with robots, took place in November with two Boston University professors, one from the College of Communication and one from the Department of Philosophy, and two research professors of philosophy from Paris State University. It shows this an interdisciplinary approach bringing together specialists in computer sciences and philosophy that produce results. After that, the two-day conference on the themes human community and virtual contact and democracy of threats was organized in Boston University on 10 and 11 April 2019 with many researchers, American, French, and other researchers from different backgrounds. So now we're going to go into the ethical and political issues as we see them at stake for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not more than the combination of three dimensions. First, problems that artificial intelligence programs solve. Second, conditions defined by those who program it. And third, data provided to those artificial intelligence programs. Each of these aspects have political and ethical implications. We can see the consequence and sometimes backlash when these choices are not taken in a broad framework, bringing together all stakeholders, or then to one company itself, or even worse, to autocratic system. So, at the core issue for us, liberal democracies, is therefore to find a appropriate framework in which all stakeholders can bring their part of that question. To do this, we need to be both transparency and fairness in the system. Transparency, that is to make algorithms public, ensure that they're used transparently, track down the license, and not give monopoly of decision making, but on the contrary, to commit to enriching or supplementing them with human decision. And just give you one example, there was a debate in course about the software that made it possible to define for each student which university he or she would attend the year after. And this is a question actually the software behind that procedure. And we see that there's a issue that because the basis on which an individual choice was based on. And it's crucially important that our governments, our local entities, be able to explain the reason that is behind those softwares. In this way, we will gradually build the ethical codes that will accompany these essential uses. But again, the global idea is to take all the opportunities offered by artificial intelligence and bring a collective debate, a sound and reasonable debate on the best way to address the challenges and opportunities involved. At the heart of this reflection, we must include commitments of social, ethnic, and sexual non-discrimination. And here I'd like to share with you a very personal moment. I was very struck during all those seminars we organized with Boston University. Actually, in Europe, the question of artificial intelligence is first seen as a question about data protection. And here in the US, I think the crucial issue is more about the biases within artificial intelligence programs, and especially gender biases that can be at the core of artificial intelligence programs. I don't see it as an opposition. I think, on the contrary, it's a great discussion we can have, because the two issues exist, basically. And it's great that the Europeans bring their concerns about data privacy, and that the Americans bring their concerns about biases. I think it's that way that we can have a very fruitful way. So it's precisely the subject we would like to discuss at the European level. And I would like to welcome here the presence of a member of the European Commission, which is a great partner and driving force for those exciting European projects that are on the table right now. And we also would like to be at the international At the international level, our efforts started in collaboration with our Canadian partners. This is maybe not known as well as it should. I actually followed those bilateral exchanges quite intensively because before coming to Boston, I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for North America. And so I was following the bilateral relations with the US, but also with Canada. And it is in that time that we started these very productive talks with our Canadian friends on what we could do in terms of international initiatives on artificial intelligence. The idea of creating an international panel on artificial intelligence was first announced in June 2018 by President Macron and by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The announcement of the creation of such a panel was repeated on December 6, 2018, by the French-Canadian Innovation Ministers, David Baines and Mounia Rajouli, in Montreal, at a very large G7 multi-party conference on AI that was convened by our Canadian partners and friends. The objective of such a panel, international panel project, is to consolidate a humanistic vision of AI based on respect for human rights and democratic values. And the idea is to create an internationally recognized organization dedicated to AI. This organization will bring together the work of experts on artificial intelligence and its impact to constitute the reference point of international reflection on AI based on the IPCC model, International Panel on Climate Change. It should be recalled that the IPCC was created back in 1988 as a G7 initiative. And we firmly believe that in the field of AI, we need such a central, such a reference point, such a focal point, so that the international community as such can have a reference point to discuss these issues. The International Panel on Artificial Intelligence is therefore a Franco-Canadian initiative whose implementation has been monitored since October 2018 by a Franco-Canadian task force. But this bilateral work, which has already produced results with a joint declaration summarizing principles and values and a draft organizational structure for the new entity, will now be complemented by adding the efforts of our other very close partners, and in particular the European Commission, which has also launched its own reflection on artificial intelligence and international initiatives that could be launched, and our European partners, member states. The field of expertise of this international panel that we are gradually settling will be broader than ethical issue. The idea is that such a panel should help mobilize existing knowledge to identify how artificial intelligence can contribute to solving major issues, that is health, education, poverty, climate, and other fundamental issues. The group will build on the work done by international organizations, states, civil society, and the scientific community. So again, the objective of this initiative is not to come directly to some kind of regulation. The objective of such an initiative is to create a framework in which the opportunities and the challenges can be identified, and the way we can define the space for these initiatives to be launched, and for all the opportunities to be grabbed, but also to understand the challenges, to have a common understanding of the challenges. The Franco-Canadian statement stresses that this group of experts will be open to all countries that share the idea of an artificial intelligence model that is neither solely for profit, nor solely for control, but also for human development and for the planet. In particular, France intends to have Japan and the European Union join this initiative, The objective is now to define the organization, its governance, and when its financing, as well as the first members, by the summer of 2018. And at that time, so it's coming very soon, France plans to organize a major World Scientific Conference on artificial intelligence. With Canada's support, France placed this International Panel on Artificial Intelligence Initiative on the agenda of its G7 presidency, thus opening a multinational negotiation process with the other 5 members countries. This is the US, Japan, Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, but also the European Commission, which is part of the G7, and our far invited countries, South Africa, Australia, Chile, and India. Negotiations under the French presidency of the G7 will take 2 complementary and successive paths. First, a ministerial meeting of the G7 digital ministers will take place on May 15, 2019, and it will be a preparatory step during which the governance, priorities, and composition of the panel will be discussed on the basis of the bilateral Franco-Canadian work. And second, the summit of the heads of state in Biarritz on 24-26 August will discuss this initiative and its parameters when it comes to composition, principles, governance, and financing of such an initiative. So again, we will launch it on a bilateral basis, but we are expanding this bilateral initiative in the G7 context, in the European context, and with all like-minded partners that wants to be part of it. After Biarritz, an international forum on artificial intelligence will be held on 29 and 30 October, at which the panel steering committee will be convened for the first time. In the autumn of 2019, the steering committee will develop the term of reference for the G2RA, so that the first plenary meeting group can be held in spring 2020. I've been a bit too long, I'm sorry for that. Again, it's a very important and very fascinating initiative, so I wanted to share with you all the details about it. As we see, we are in a crucial and exciting time for all the powers of goodwill that wants to be part of this global effort to define the framework of tomorrow's artificial intelligence. So I look forward to our discussion today. I will be pleased to stay in close contact with all of you if you're interested in having more details about the run-up to the G7 Biarritz Summit at the end of August. Thank you so much.
Up and down. Can I click this button?
Council General, thank you very much. The timing of this conference is really around the G7 and the effort of the Boston Global Forum to contribute ideas for consideration at the upcoming G7 meeting. An example from the past is the white paper that we produced on cybersecurity with an emphasis on ethical codes and standards. And this year we're submitting a white paper around artificial intelligence. Juan has distributed to you a copy of that document. Juan asked if I would kind of briefly summarize the content of it. I'm not an AI expert. I had a small part in the drafting of the document. There are people at the table who had a larger part, know more about this subject. Juan did a lot of the drafting. Honestly, David and others. I'm kind of their editor. That's one of the roles that I often play with these documents. But I do want to give you a quick brief overview what's in the document, and invite you to look more carefully at what's being proposed. So in this effort, we're working to some degree with the World Leadership Alliance, the Club de Madrid. Most of you, maybe all of you, know about the Club de Madrid, the membership of which is former heads of state, heads of government of democratic countries. And what we're trying to do is kind of think ahead a little bit about AI and where AI can advance governance and where it can advance citizenship, with particular kind of goals, specific goals in mind in each of those areas. And there are two components of the model that are described in the document that Juan has distributed. One is what we are calling AI government. That's the application of AI to assist public sector decision-making and to strengthen government accountability. And the other is AI citizen, and that's the application of AI to empower citizens and to enhance or heighten their accountability, not only accountability of government, but the accountability of citizens as well. The goals of AI government, I'll talk a little bit about AI government, and then I'll talk a little bit about AI citizen. The goals of AI government, at least the broad goals, are to improve the quality of public services, and secondly, to increase both the efficiency and the accountability of administrative units and personnel. Now, a key part of the model that we're proposing, and this is very visionary, this is trying to look ahead, is what we call the National Decision Making and Data Center. I was struck by what the Consul General said about the collection of health data in France and the power that comes with that data. This is an attempt to collect lots and lots of data from lots and lots of units of government across many policy spheres. I don't know if any of you have tried to work with big data. It can be really frustrating, particularly in the American case. Sometimes you can get access to the data set, but not the code book, and you have no idea what the numbers mean and the like. But here's an idea about kind of bringing all this data together so that it can communicate across spheres, so that you can take information, for example, in the area of transportation, which relates to public health, areas of social services, which relate to public health, and really use the power of big data in making decisions about policy and in delivering government services. To implement AI government, obviously, you would need to build this National Decision-Making Center. You need to provide mechanisms to evaluate the performance of administrative units and officials. The Consul General talked a lot about setting rules on the protection of privacy and personal data, which would be essential in this kind of system. And then ultimately working toward creating automated public services in many, many areas of public policy. And we're also proposing an index, and this is really outside the model in a certain sense. This is something that the Boston Global Forum would be doing, and this is basically monitoring the progress that governments are making toward AI government and using pretty substantial standards. These are just a few of the standards that would be applied in creating that index. They'd be weighted differently. We would be reviewing, looking at countries based on transparency, compliance, implementation, the integrity of their programs, and universality, the degree to which their efforts really are designed to work across the whole of the society. The second component is AI citizen, and we have a definition of AI citizen. And all of this, of course, is subject to your suggestions for improvement of what we're proposing. AI citizen refers to people who reside legally in a country and who respect the common global values set forth by the UN. And the purpose of AI Citizen is to empower, in the first instance, to empower citizens, and then also to make them more responsible for their actions as citizens. We have some specific goals with AI Citizen. One is to nurture and reward innovation, creativity, and so on. Second is to enable individuals to participate more fully and actively in politics and society, and then to enable individuals to better hold government and other actors accountable for what they do. Some mechanisms that we think are necessary to operationalize this concept of AI Citizen. Some kind of support center that would provide citizens with the information they know they would need to have in order to make decisions. Some mechanism for amplifying their voice and channeling it to the appropriate officials or organizations. And this is probably the most controversial part of it. I'm not personally sold on it, but we didn't have a chance to really debate it very much. Some kind of social value reward system, which would provide citizens a way to track their contributions to society, as well as a way for society to acknowledge those contributions. I worry a little bit that this kind of changes the incentives for contributions from intrinsic to extrinsic, but sort of thinking about how do we recognize the individuals in society who are making contributions. Implementation of this particular concept, you obviously have to work AI literacy and the ethical norms surrounding AI into the education system. You would need to develop the mechanisms that I just outlined in the previous slide. You need standards, of course, and ensure that citizens have equal access and equal opportunity in this system. The summary, AIWS model that we propose envisions a society where innovation, creativity, and dedication, democracy, individual rights, and the rule of law are recognized and promoted, and where AI is used to assist and improve government decision-making to make progress towards a more socially inclusive and just society in which citizens have a larger voice in their government. So that's a quick overview. The document itself is far more detailed in all of these parts. I do invite you to take a look at it. It is still a work in progress. It's still sort of in draft stage, but we're going to close it down pretty quickly. So if you have some thoughts on that, please communicate them to Tuan. But I would like to give a copy of the current draft, and we will give a more polished and final draft to the Consul General. And he will convey it to his government and then into the G7 process. Thank you. So each year at this conference, we grant our World Leader Award. This year, the World Leader in AI World Society. And I'm pleased to announce that this year's recipient is Vinton Cerf. Vinton Cerf is recognized as a father of the internet, sharing the title with co-inventor Bob Kahn. His contributions have been widely acknowledged with a long list of honorary degrees, including doctorates from Yale and Tsinghua University, and numerous awards, including the U.S. National Medal of Technology, the Turing Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Marconi Prize. He was an inaugural inductee of the Internet Hall of Fame. After his pioneering work in creating the internet while at the U.S. Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Mr. Cerf helped develop the first commercial email system. Then, in the 1990s, along with Bob Kahn and others, he founded the Internet Society, ISOC, to provide leadership in creating standards and policy relating to the Internet. He subsequently helped found ICANN, which coordinates name and numerical spaces on the Internet, and would later serve as chairman of ICANN's board. He serves on the advisory board of the Council of Cybersecurity and is a past president of the Association for Computing Machinery. Since 2005, Mr. Cerf has been with Google as a vice president and as its chief internet evangelist, a position which has enabled him to be a leading voice in how technology will shape society in areas such as artificial intelligence, the environment, and digital transformation. A distinguishing feature of Mr. Cerf's long and remarkable career has been his effort to ensure that the Internet serves humanitarian values. He has been a tireless advocate of net neutrality and for making broadband technology more widely available, and has supported innovative approaches to global problems, including the digital divide and the gender gap. The digital revolution is transforming how we live, work, and connect with each other, and few individuals have made a larger and more positive contribution to that transformation than has been Cerf. We are honored to recognize him as this year's recipient of the World Leader in AI World Society Award. And we have now a video from Mr. Cerf.
I'm Los Angeles. Some of you might know me as one of the founders of the Internet. It's a great honor to be recognized by the AI World Society, and certainly by Governor Dukakis, and I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. But I will say that this focus of attention on artificial intelligence and the role that it might play in present and in our future is timely and important. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that we should be equally concerned in general about any kind of software, especially if it's in some kind of a device that has the ability to communicate on the internet. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is that once those devices are online, they're potentially reachable by anyone, anywhere on the internet. And that raises all kinds of potential security hazards. So the attack surface, if I can use that term, is quite broad when any device is attached to the global internet. So we should be very concerned not only about artificial intelligence, but about software in general, especially software that has bugs. And unfortunately, we're at the stage now, 8 years into programming computers, where we haven't figured out how to write software that doesn't have bugs. The consequence of that, of course, is that if those bugs are discovered, they may be exploited by people with malicious intent, and there can be all kinds of side effects. So in some respects, I think we should be as concerned about software and its bugs as we should be about artificial intelligence and our uncertainty about how some of it works, in particular machine learning systems where the multi-layer neural networks are programmed by running them through a whole series of examples, whether it's images or sound or text or something else, out of which we arrange this multi-layer neural network weights and produce certain behaviors which appear to do what we want it to do, but might have internal biases that we didn't recognize, or might break in ways that we can't anticipate. A small change in an incoming image might cause a completely wrong decision or recognition to be made by the artificially intelligent machine learning system. So I think we are well advised to stay focused on artificial intelligence, machine learning, bugs in software, how we use these things, how much autonomy we offer to devices that are running this kind of software, especially if it's going to make decisions that we don't have any role to play in. Even your refrigerator could be abused by
by running software in the device, in the operating system or in the computer in such a way that you don't notice that if there's anything wrong, the ice cream stays cold, your milk stays cold. But this device, which is on the network, is also being used as part of the botnet. It's generating spam, it's distributing malware. It could be a variety of things. And we wouldn't notice because it's doing its other functions correctly as well. This leads to a very general concern about understanding about the safety, the security, the integrity of software that we use in communicating devices. So I'm hoping to have an opportunity to participate in 2020. I apologize for my inability to do so this year, but I do appreciate recognition of the importance of this topic. And I hope that during the 2019 conference that you'll come up with some good ideas for paths to follow to create a more safe, more stable, and secure environment. So thanks again very much for this recognition. I look forward to seeing you on the net.
So next is our featured speaker, Paul Nemitz, who has come to us from the European Commission. Brussels, has been with him last night. And, Paul, the podium is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss, and especially in the great setting with very global presence today, and also the interdisciplinary mixture of participants coming from academia, technology, diplomacy. I think we will have a very good discussion. Much has been said already, so I will not dwell again into what is AI. I think it's like day and night. We know now it's day, we know when it's night, when it's dark. When the sun goes down, where we draw the line between day and night, we could have a very, very long discussion. But we don't need the discussion on AI. When we see it, we know it. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say that there's a certain hype about AI. We have just seen a study produced among startups which claim that they use or develop AI, and more than 30% of those who claim to do AI actually don't. It's very fashionable right now for consultants and advisories and also academia to say, we are working on AI, but actually there is not so much new. So why? Why are we nevertheless having this high degree of activity both by companies, but also by governments and academia? Because on the one hand, there is a promise, and I would say, it's used as a promise that this technology will solve a lot of problems. And on the other hand, there are people who describe apocalyptic risks coming from this technology. And in the middle of all this are the policymakers, and we have heard already today about the French vision, and I think the European vision, the European Commission's vision is exactly the same, who have the task to maximize the potential for society in terms of economic growth, employment, but also public interest beyond those two areas. And also want to minimize the risks. And I think that's what I would like to focus a little bit on, namely what can law and ethics contribute to this balance. Let me say that, like France, and here, just a word about the complication of Europe, the European Union has a strategy for AI, which says that every member state should have a strategy of AI, and we are, I think, mutually inspiring each other. It's a very iterative process in Europe between the member states and the European Union. And so the European Commission presented a strategy on AI in April of last year, which contains 3 big chapters, namely, like in France, the industrial policy and research aspect. Of course, we want to be leaders in the technology, leaders in research. Second, the preparation of the labor market. We need people to acquire the skills, lifelong learning, also in the older generation, both to develop, but also to adopt and use AI, and I would say not only as a customer, but as a citizen who understands also a little bit the risks and advantages when using this technology. So this is acquiring skills not only to, let's say, participate in commerce, but, and I think that's the uniqueness and interest here in the project of AI World Society, also to use and work with this technology in future processes of governance, public interest and democracy. And third, ethics and law for AI. It has often been said that it's the great disadvantage of Europe that we are leaders in ethics debates and making laws, while others develop the technology and reap the economic benefit. And this is in fact the discourse which I have been a witness of all my life working in public service. This has been said relating to the internet. It has been said relating to modern technologies of energy. It's a reoccurring discourse. It has been a very deep discourse relating to environmental protection, for example, in the 90s already. The invention by Europe in primary law of the principle of precaution relating to technology was announced as a huge catastrophe for economic development, and promises were made that Europe would fall behind in economics and technology. I myself, when I was lead director on the GDPR and the European Commission, was confronted, for example, by a study from the American Chamber of Commerce, which said if you implement this law, if you adopt it, it means minus 5% of GDP in Europe. So I would say, together with messianic promises of technology, go announcements of economic interest that if you apply the principle of precaution, there will be huge negative consequences. That's normal. That's interest-driven discourse. The empirical reality is completely different. If we look back, for example, at the environmental movement and its successes, we have seen that being environmentally sustainable as an enterprise means also to be resource efficient. And it has become a huge driver for profitability, not only for European companies, but for companies worldwide to become ecologically sustainable and therefore resource efficient in terms of using as little as possible natural resources. And in the end, some were only convinced when the slogan of the greening of GE, General Electric, went around the world, and some are still not convinced today that we can marry in a very productive way the goals of climate change and ecological protection with economic growth. So it's clear that we will never convince all, but I would say that there's a large conviction in Europe stemming from the time of the ecological movement, the anti-atomic energy movement, also the peace movement at the time, all went hand in hand, started in the 70s with the great book of Hans Jonas, The Principle of Responsibility, written in New York at the New School of Social Research, that the principle of precaution applied as part of innovation policy is a secret of success and not of failure. Because applying this principle of precaution as part of innovation, as an integral part of innovation, ensures long-term sustainability, not only from an ecological point of view, but also from a point of view of economic and social and political sustainability of a technology or a business model. And the empirics in this, I could now develop further, but they are most striking in the greening of industry. Now let me turn, before I come to what this means for AI, for a moment to data protection and the GDPR process. Of course, historically speaking, Europe has a completely different outlook on personal data and the related right of individual informational self-determination than America, for that matter, or China. Why? Because Europe has a completely different history. Big parts of Europe have lived through communist dictatorships. Germany has lived through fascist dictatorships. And in both of these dictatorships, the aim of government was to know everything about everybody. And this historical experience raises the sensitivity about collection, and it is this historical background which led to the creation of the legal concept of informational self-determination as a fundamental right, as a civil liberty, which at that time was not written in any constitution by judges and courts in Europe. And when I say by judges and courts in Europe, you can really go through the different layers of jurisprudence on fundamental rights and civil liberties, and you find this concept in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, based on the European Convention of Human Rights. A system where member states of this convention, which are the EU member states plus a few more, are controlled from the outside by a court in Strasbourg, whether they comply with fundamental and human rights, right through constitutional courts in many of the member states. So this pre-existing principle was put in EU law in 1995 already into a directive, and honestly GDPR has not brought any new principles which are a revolution, but it's rather an evolution of the instrument which already existed from 1995. The most important evolution is certainly the powers of data protection authorities in the member states, which are independent and which can now fine companies which don't comply with the rules up to 4% of the world turnover. That has certainly raised the attention of boardrooms all over the world, and that was the intention. That was the political intention we had. I still remember the moment when we had the first discussion where I asked the question, what about aligning the fining system of GDPR to the fining system in competition law? Because when it's about cartels, when it's about antitrust, we have the fining system, like in America, very rigorous. We can impose up to 10% of world turnover on companies as a fine. And we do it. But in the data protection at the time, the highest fine in Europe was 600,000. So at that time, we started to work on aligning both fining systems, and in terms of methodology, it has worked. We have a percentage of world turnover. The political compromise, and I think that's normal in democracy, is it's not the same, it's just quote 4%. But enough to impress. And so it took altogether 6 years to get this regulation into place, because you can imagine the lobby trying to avoid this at all costs. I would say historically we were in a fortunate situation. We had a vice president of the commission who was from the conservative, you would say, in American Republican side. We had the rapporteur in the European Parliament who was from the green side, you would say liberal, Democrat. And then, of course, we had Edward Snowden as a wake-up call, which brought home to everybody what these technologies today allow. And altogether, this was a historical lucky moment to get this instrument through. I would say, and this now I'm speculating, but I can tell you, before Snowden, there were moments when we thought we will never make it in the European Parliament. We had nearly 4,000 amendments in the democratic process in the Parliament, but Snowden really was the wake-up call. It made a huge difference in the negotiation of this instrument. And so at this moment, when we are at a very important American contribution to getting GDPR in place, let me branch out a little bit on what we have learned from America and what we're learning now also in relation to AI. Because the discourse that America mainly develops the technology and makes the money, and on the other hand, you have China, which also develops the technology, but not only for money, but mainly to have a successful communist dictatorship to control the people. Good old dream of the Communist Party since 1917 to fulfill communism through technology, finally achieved through AI in China, social scoring system and all these things. I think this discourse has a few defects. And here in Boston, in Harvard, we can see the defect, which is, it is of course not true to describe America as just one big commercial block represented by the stock market, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. But there's a lot of very, very good work and very, very good thinking in America, which we have profited from in the work on GDPR and which we are also now profiting from in the work on AI. And today's discussion and the paper which has been produced here in Boston with a focus on making AI useful for democracy and for public interest, not only for targeted advertisement, which is of course the great moneymaker right now, is just one example of many. I would like to quote another example, which is very, very, very important, which is right now the work of the FTC. I arrived in Boston and I learned that Facebook makes provision of up to $5 billion for a possible fine of the FTC because Facebook did not follow up on its promises relating to privacy. I have to say, I have a great respect for the work of the FTC over the years. I've worked a lot together with the colleagues from the FTC, Edith Ramirez, the chairwoman under President Obama. They have been extremely helpful when we negotiated. I was the negotiating leader for the Commission of the Privacy Shield. Very professional, and of course, the great advantage of the FTC in comparison to European data protection authorities is that it has an experience of rigorous enforcement in competition law against infringements of the rules of protecting against illegal agreements between enterprises in antitrust. And this experience hopefully now transitions across the corridor to the other colleagues who deal with privacy. And I would love to see this learning from competition law transiting into privacy taking place also in Europe. So I think we're all looking forward to the FTC doing its job under the rule of law in America, applying American law, maybe also making a reference to the safe harbor and the privacy shield where America took commitments towards Europe and Facebook undersigned these commitments relating to respecting privacy rules of European nature, I would say. Privacy rules which provide equivalent protection of individuals when they process, when Facebook, for example, processes data from Europe in America. And so the FTC has the potential here to show that these agreements actually mean something, mainly by basing this fine also on this non-respect of these agreements, if such non-respect is found by the FTC. But it also has the chance to bring America into the lead. And I would say also historically speaking, one could say, if one has a certain perspective on the development and academic analysis of privacy, back into the lead on privacy by demonstrating that it's not only important to have rules on the books, but also to enforce the rules. So there is therefore, I would say, not necessarily a situation of opposition between Europe and America on these issues, but we are struggling on both sides of the Atlantic with the same challenges for public interest and the same problems, and we can learn a lot from each other. And this learning can also take place in relation to the future shaping of AI. And like in relation to data protection and privacy, I think first of all, the interdisciplinary approach will be key. Because this is probably, after the internet, the second big wave of technology, where in everything which is done, we have to think in terms of a societal approach. Internet policy already is actually societal policy. It's not only technology policy. The internet reaches today via the mobile devices everywhere. It is the forum for public debate in democracy. It allows to control people. It allows to centralize information. It's much more than just something that should be left to technologists and to be debated under the heading technology. It is present in all spheres of life. And after theory, if it's true, as we hear, that AI will be as pervasive as electricity, we have to look at AI in the same way as we look at rules which we make in legislation. Because AI will contain these rules according to which decisions are made, because it will take largely the decisions, this technology, these programs. And if it doesn't take decisions, it will guide people, and some would say nudge or manipulate people in a certain direction. So certainly it will have huge impacts, both on our individual freedoms and on our actions, but also collectively on how law and democracy function. And that is the first reason why there is so much debate about AI, apart from the economic earning potential and efficiency potential for economy and also innovation processes which may arise. The second reason why the debate is so intense and so broad is because we are struggling with the new challenge of autonomy of technology. Who will be responsible for the new causalities which may be caused by a program which learns and therefore evolves? And maybe evolves in a direction which was not intended by the creator. Who will be responsible for damages which such a program creates, economic, but maybe also physical, environmental damages, but also under public law without damages? So this question of liability has already led the European Commission to set up a special working group with experts on civil law liability, torts, and the question which is posed obviously is, should AI be a subject of strict liability? We have in Europe, like in the United States, very strict rules on product liability. Should they be applied to AI? And here, as also on all the other issues, we are in a very broad thinking process, a process which I would say a process of iterative learning. On the one hand, interdisciplinary, in debates between philosophers, lawyers, political scientists, sociologists, anthropologists, and the technological world, both in academic capacity, but also in terms of companies, but also in an iterative learning process in 3 or 4 directions, one could say. First of all, within the European Union, between the European level and the member states governments, but also civil society. And on the other hand, of course, the global process, which was so amply described by my colleague, the German Consul General from the French Consulate General here in Boston. So in this learning process, the Commission has focused on the ethics. We have assembled a group of 52 independent experts. Well, as far as one can call it, people also who come from business independent, there were consciously also business representatives in this group. They have produced 2 papers which have been made public, the second paper being an iteration of the first paper. And the Commission has just taken this paper and on the 8th of April, in a communication, made largely the content of these principles on ethics its own. So there is now a communication of the European Commission on the table of 8th of April on the building of AI which we can trustworthy. And the principles which we would like to see in this trustworthy AI from the outset integrated evolve around 3 big pillars. We want AI to be trustworthy because it acts lawfully. So one could say these programs should never take action which, if a human would commit them, would be illegal. Lawfulness. And that's not small fry. In a business climate, in a world where in business schools, the future managers are taught about disruptive innovation, and it's absolutely okay as part of disruptive innovation to disrupt the law. That is probably not a concept which we can afford with AI. I would say we have seen a lot of disrupting the law in the internet age. The European Commission already had to impose 8.3 billion euros of fines on Google for not complying with our competition rules. We had to impose the decision on Apple to pay taxes in Ireland, 11 billion euros of taxes not paid. You all have followed the debates about copyright, about Uber just coming in, about Airbnb doing whatever they want. So there is an issue in the digital, in the internet business of disrupting the law, or others say, let's move on and excuse later. I would say that is something where we have to be careful to apply this thinking also to AI. Yes, we want to be innovative, we want innovators to thrive, but not in illegality. So lawfulness, first principle. Second, beyond the law, the development of the technology should be ethically based. Not all what is good and necessary in society can be put into laws. The law is the strongest sword you need it to be able to enforce, but there are other things which go beyond, and that's ethics. And third, we want this technology to be robust, namely to perform as intended. And what Windsurf said, that's also not small fry. Because the more complex the technology gets, the more able it gets, the more there will be issues of robustness. And one of the great scientists, and of which you have many here in Harvard, Iyad Rahman from the MIT, has just published a paper in Nature together with a number of colleagues, where he says, this again for me, example of how we can learn from America, where he says, the most important thing on AI will be continuous control of the systems which we have put in place. Because we must follow them to see how they learn and how they mutate, how they behave. To be able to learn about what we have done wrong and how to correct. So as a principle of responsibility, and one could say principle of precaution, we're putting a technology into the world which is extremely powerful, which will learn, which will mutate one way or the other. And we want it to do this. That is the whole efficiency game. But then we also have to follow it. Like we follow our medicine. When we put a medicine out there, we follow its effects on humans, and if we see that after all we were wrong in the effects, the classic case, too many people dying after all after having taken the great medicine which was promised to be the great cure, it must be taken off the market or it must be amended in terms of the mix. So these are the three basic principles: lawfulness, robustness, and ethic orientation. And then the group, and now the European Commission, has further developed these principles into 7 more operational rules. The first is that AI should stand under human agency and human oversight. So the human in the loop. And this is not only the turn off button, the emergency turn off button, but if I can come back to the GDPR, where we have an article on automated decision making, human dignity as a fundamental right requires that people have the possibility to say no to automated decision making related to them when this automated decision-making touches their fundamental rights. Why? Because if we follow our conception of the human being as laid out in the Bible, as laid out in human enlightenment, in the Enlightenment movement, and laid out in our constitutions, we cannot imagine humans as subjects to become objects of technology. Objects of technology where technology controls them and decides over their fate. It may be efficient to do it, to control people through technology, but it is not the picture of the human being who is responsible and who acts and who has freedom and participates in democracy as the decider that the state or private parties take decisions over the individual in an automated way if the individual says no. So the right to human decision making and the right to appeal is key. Second, robustness of course includes safety, where technology can do great harm. Great efforts and investments must be made to avoid such harm. Then, of course, privacy, data protection, data governance. And I would say that as regards personal data, meaning data which identifies human beings or makes it possible to identify human beings, GDPR contains already a high percentage of the rules which we need to work well with AI. I would go as far as saying it's very, very difficult to identify additional rules one would need for AI when it processes personal data beyond GDPR. Why? Because GDPR contains this right to individual decision-making. It contains human decision-making, the right to object to automated decision-making. It contains very far-going rights to information about the program, which decides what data are put into it, what is the content of the algorithm, what is the purpose, what is the impact of decision making. All this you can ask to see under GDPR, at least in Europe. And the data protection authorities have the job to make sure that this happens. And GDPR also contains the very important rights to delete data or to rectify data. You can ask that your data, if it has been collected somewhere, and if there is no specific legal base which says these data should be stored, and this must be a parliamentary law which says this, you can ask for deletion. You say, I don't like Facebook anymore. I now want to use a different social network, and then Facebook must delete. In the European Court of Justice, there's now a great case from France about exactly this duty of Google. The French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, at the time under the chairwoman Isabelle Fabre-Perotin, said to Google, you have to delete information about people, and that's it. And Google said, no, we don't think we have to delete. We only think we make the information invisible in Europe, because everything else would be extraterritorial. We want to be able to continue showing this information in America and the rest of the world. And the CNIL said, no. Deletion, as the law says, means deletion. And logic imposes that if you have deleted data and therefore complied with the law, you cannot show it anywhere. So this case went up through the French courts and is now before the European Court of Justice. And let's see what the European Court of Justice decides on this. But I would say it's an as dramatic case as the case which is not yet before the court, but certainly will come there. Namely, do we have a right to see the predictions which are made on us by Facebook and Google and others based on the personal data which they've collected about us? Yann LeCun, the French head of AI at Facebook, famously once twittered, we are making 300 trillion predictions a day at Facebook, to demonstrate the enormous computing power Facebook has. My answer to that has been yes. And all these predictions are personal data on individuals. And everybody should have the right to see the predictions about themselves and also have the right to the deletion of these predictions. And I'm sure this will also become part of mitigation. But one thing is clear. In the world of AI, where predicting, of course, will be much more important than collecting, and where influencing people will be more important than predicting, if these informations and tools on people are not falling under the rights of GDPR, and therefore people have the right to see them, to know about them, but also to ask for deletion, the right to data protection in the world with AI will become a very empty right. So I am very convinced that the courts will take the right decisions here. And when I talk to Americans, there are many Americans who are extremely worried about these potentials, what people can be done to by those who own the data and make predictions or influence them, whether it's the state snooping or whether it's big business snooping. And by the way, again, a learning from America. The best book right now on the market comes from a Harvard Business School professor on all this in the private sector, not government. And it's called Surveillance Capitalism. And the author is Professor Shoshana Zuboff of Harvard Business School. It's a fantastic book which I suggest for everybody to read, to understand into which power constellations all of us as individuals, we are living already, and how the world could look tomorrow if we don't build a system of both serving democracy and the functioning of the rule of law and fundamental rights in terms of maintaining our political system. And I have to say, not much in America about the issues in the political system coming from technological systems, but also a system which protects us as individuals. So GDPR helps in this path into a world of rule by technology. But the question after the ethics principles, which I will first complete and then I will discuss this question a little bit with you, is can we leave it beyond GDPR at ethics, or do we need new law? But first, what are the other ethics principles which were put down by the European AI high-level group? So we discussed human agency and oversight, robustness and safety, privacy and data governance. Fourth, transparency. And here, very important, we all need to know, are we dealing with a human or are we dealing with a machine? And this is something which I would say cannot be left to voluntary ethics. You know, one company does it like this and the other does it like that. No. This is something where we need a law, which makes it clear that those who employ these technologies, when these technologies serve dialogue with human beings, the human must be made aware, hello, it's a machine speaking. And this is, of course, a fortiori extremely important when we come into the democratic environment and closer to elections. I mean, just imagine you start your telephone in the morning, you look at Facebook and Twitter, and there are all these messages in favor of one candidate. And you think, gee, you know, everybody supports that person. And it's all machine produced. That's not possible. So I think already for that reason, but also for reasons of transparency in contracting and for reasons of human dignity, we need to be made aware. Right now it's a machine sending you a message or it's a machine speaking to you. Diversity and non-discrimination was mentioned. It's a huge debate in America. Very good papers coming from New York, AI Now, Kate Crawford, Meredith Whittaker, and so on, these scientists at New York University. Great technology scrutiny. I think there America has a huge advantage over Europe because both America develops the technology, so you are closer to technology, you are social scientists, your lawyers, sociologists, anthropologists are closer to technology, but also, of course also closer to the failure of technology when served, to the risks of technology and also to the abuse of technology. And sixth principle, and this is where the paper falls very nicely: societal well-being, environmental well-being, and accountability as the seventh principle. So on accountability, just a side remark, I'm a great friend of Julia Engwin, the great former Wall Street Journal journalist who went then to ProPublica and just wanted to start a newsroom called The Markup, where she received 20 million from Craig Newmark. You know, again, something which we can only dream of in Europe. She developed this concept of tech accountability journalism, which is absolutely necessary these days, because let's be honest, if we don't have strong tech accountability journalism, many of us, including myself, we will not be able to do our job. There is a problem in the technological world which goes beyond, let's say, commercial interests or abuse of technology, which is the simple fact that the technology becomes so complicated that you need mediators to explain, to help understand, including helping understand policymakers and helping understand other parts of science to take a view on the technology. So Julia Engren has achieved very, very great things. I still remember when in the beginning of GDPR, so this is 6 or 8 years ago, suddenly the Wall Street Journal started a series of articles, all investigative journalism, under the title, What They Know. And they were Facebook, Google, and so on. And Julia Engren and her colleagues in each of these series brought up stunning revelations of what they know and what they do with it. She, for example, I think, if I remember correctly, was the one who broke to the world that there are many websites which automatically raise prices if you log in with an Apple computer rather than with a Windows computer. The assumption on these websites being, well, if you have an Apple computer, you have paid more, you have more money, so let's raise the prices. You know, fantastic journalism. Very difficult to document. She also documented, you know, for me, I still remember these things because that was great learning. The price of the father who starts to get these mails, baby diapers, baby nourishing, so on, through the mailings, the commercial mailings from Walmart and others, learns about the pregnancy of the daughter. Because the daughter had been profiled, she had searched, she had been in shops looking at these things, and the mailings come home. And so, you know, the companies, the profilers, the technological automated profile of the human, knows earlier that the daughter is pregnant than the daddy. So this is another stunning example of, I would say, you know, America has given to the world, because on us, this series by Julia Engren in the Wall Street Journal was very influential, and I wish her well in the present discussions on starting her newsroom markup and the difficulties that she encounters in that context. So I wanted to discuss with you as the last contribution to today's conference, the question, do we need new law, or can we just leave it all to ethics and self-regulation? And I would say we need to give ourselves, or have to search for the parameters for decision for this question. There is a parameter which exists in American law and also in many countries in Europe and European law, which I would call the parameter of essentiality. So if something is essential, it needs to be dealt with by the democratic legislator, because that's what democracy is about. Democracy is not the important things are decided by the executive or by business, and for the rest, members of parliaments, Congress, Senate, European Parliament, you know, they can talk. Democracy means rule by the people through their elected representatives. And the principle of essentiality says everything which is important in society in the end needs to be decided there. And what is the criteria for deciding what is important? There are two criteria. First, whenever there is an ingerence into civil liberties and fundamental rights, classic American sentence, no taxation without representation, it's an expression of the principle of essentiality. So when individual rights are concerned of people, and second, if there are important considerations of the good functioning of the state, of democracy, for example. So if these are our parameters, what new law may we need on AI? And of course, ideally agreed globally with our partners around the world. But I also say, having been in public law issues and private law issues in shipping in the previous job as the maritime coordinator of the Commission, of course, nobody in Europe is ever going to take the commitment, and nobody in America, that we will only give ourselves rules in our democratic process only if they are already agreed internationally. Because that would mean we have to wait for 20 years, as we can see in shipping. Shipping is probably the best example of a sector where the principle that rules must come from the IMO has led to a hugely structural under-regulation of shipping. So, yes, we will look, of course, and the Commission is already starting this, and France, we have had great examples of diplomacy. You know, there are many mosaic stones of diplomacy which are being put in place to convince partners to take others along, and maybe one day we will arrive at some international law rules on AI, but I don't think that that is a precondition for doing what is necessary in democracy from time to time, namely to decide, like we have decided on GDPR. Of course, in parallel, we have worked on the Convention 108 in the Council of Europe, which goes beyond the European Union. The Council of Europe is an international organization where, for example, Canada has also signed up, and we have a number of South American countries who are looking at the Convention of the Council of the Europe Convention on Data Protection and Privacy. The US has signed up to the protocol of the Council of Europe on data security, cybercrime, and in the same way, the US has signed up to the Cybercrime Convention of the Council of Europe. The US could also sign up to the Convention 108 on data protection of the Council of Europe. So the Council of Europe is a classic instrument for us to go beyond just the European Union and create international consensus, which has the form of soft law and sometimes also hard law. So yes, of course, we're looking for broad consensus, and I think we are now in the finding and discussion phase. But I would say, in the same way that we need a healthy criticism of the saying that the internet must remain undivided, because if you go too far with this principle, it means no democracy can take any rules autonomously, because that leads to a fragmentation of the internet. You have a conflict between those two principles, and GDPR clearly was a step where Europe decided to do some things autonomously, which have an impact on the internet. In the same way we have done this before, I don't think that we, or for that matter, others would be ready to precondition lawmaking when it is necessary in a democratic process to prior international law. So when we think about, therefore, applying the principle of essentiality, it's not so clear and not so easy to find new areas where law is necessary. Because, as I said already, whenever AI treats personal data, for us GDPR is applicable. That is already a huge element of protection. What about if AI doesn't deal with personal data? Should we extend key principles of transparency, of data protection, to AI working with non-personal data? I think that is a legitimate question which needs to be discussed about. And I could imagine that there are many who say, yes, some of the principles should be extended. And we need a law not only because of the principle of essentiality, we need law also to create a level playing field. And that is, of course, a very, very important concern for economic development. You want a level playing field where everybody plays by the same rules. And if you leave things to self-regulation, that's not the case. You don't have a level playing field. So that will be my final remark. Why is Mark Zuckerberg in his article of 30th of March in the Washington Post suddenly saying we need laws. We need laws on privacy, we need laws on content regulation, we need laws on portability. By the way, portability is already part of GDPR. You have a right to the portability of your data from one service provider to the other. I would say, first, there is of course some learning in people and organizations, and it's good that Silicon Valley moves on from a very irresponsible, let's just do it, let's break things and let's excuse later, to we take responsibility, we are corporate citizens, we are working with democracy, not against it. And if you read the book of Shoshana Zuboff about democracy attitudes in Silicon Valley, remember, Harvard Business School professor, you get very, very worried. So I would say there is hopefully an element of learning, that's good. There is maybe also an element of strategy, which pertains to level playing field. Because in a startup economy, in an economy where technology moves very fast, if you realize that your enterprise is under constant public scrutiny to be ethical, to be good, to do the right thing, you start thinking about level playing field. Why us always? Why not everybody? And maybe this argument that the rules should apply to everybody is also an important argument for increasingly for those who previously, I can tell you that from my own experience, lobbied heavily, for example, against GDPR. So where does this leave us at the end? We want a level playing field, we want rules to be enforced, also against those who don't want to play ball. And there we learn from America all the time, because when it comes to the enforcement of laws, America is certainly a great example of a pretty tough hand. We want democracy to live. That means also our parliaments have to do their job. We want to see them acting. We want to see them take responsibility and put good rules in place. We don't want parliaments which do nothing in the public interest. I think we can be happy if parliaments come up with laws and take responsibility. And a discourse which on the one hand says there's an issue in democracy, we have not enough people engaging in democracy, we have people on the street, the Gilets jaunes, we have Orban in Poland, autocratic tendencies and so on. Yes, we have a problem with democracy, but if we have a problem with democracy, one way to revive democracy is also to say, let democracy do its job. So my personal view is here very clear. The neoliberal discourse of we don't want laws. It can all be done in self-regulation, ethics codes, and so on, is part of how the modern economy-driven discourse has undermined democracy. So if we want democracy, I think we have to work with democracy and make it useful and come up with good laws which reply to the principle of ethics, which reply to the principle of essentiality, which cover the field where we are convinced that we want a level playing field, and where we are therefore convinced that we want rules which are enforceable. And I think the task before us on AI is to identify those fields where this is necessary. In Europe, I can say, I don't find much. I gave you one example where I'm convinced that we need a binding law, and that is the transparency principle, namely that the platforms have to take responsibility, that one sees it's a bot, it's a machine, and also on the internet, those who employ outside the platforms just directly on the internet automated messaging, they must make this transparent. Like, by the way, any newspaper which takes paid advertisement must make clear, is this a journalistic contribution or am I doing here PR? Yes, so we impose this burden, quote, quote, on our press, which by the way competes with the platforms, with the technology platforms, often on very unfair terms. And we don't have such a principle yet relating to the internet generally and a fortiori not to AI. So I think that's one example. In America, probably a little bit more work is necessary because you don't have rules like the GDPR. But for Europe, I would say that to give a frame to AI, it is possible to define a few limited areas where the law actually would also help innovation by increasing the acceptability, the usability, and the take-up of the technology in society. Thank you very much, and happy to discuss with you.
Well, thank you for the very helpful. I've asked Paul to sort of serve as the moderator, and he's agreed to do that. But you're not confined essentially to responding to what Paul said, so that you have some observations, comments that add to the discussion. That's also kind of in the realm of what we'd like to see here. So Paul's going to kind of point fingers as to who speaks next. So.
Please.
This was really a very interesting and provocative and thorough presentation. I'd like to ask you to. This was a very informative presentation. I found it very important. I'd like you to comment and expand across any of these talked about the precautionary principle that you identified earlier, which has become a cornerstone of many international.
Okay, it's very quick on the precautionary principle. So the basic book of philosophy is Hans Jonas, The Principle of Responsibility, in German 1979, in English somewhere there in those years. And what did he say? He said, if there is a technology which potentially, but we're not sure of this, but potentially could either lead to the extinction of mankind or change in a dramatic way the way we live as humans, and he was thinking at the time about atomic power, but already also about life prolongation, making people live 200, 300 years, then we have a double duty in case of uncertainty of information about what this technology will lead. The first duty is to invest in our knowledge about what the risks of this technology are and how to mitigate them. And second, we must put ourselves emotionally into a state which allows us politically together to take the necessary and sometimes hard decisions today, which are necessary to avoid the possible but uncertain, very negative consequences in the long future. So that's the gist of his book of the Principle of Responsibility. And this was taken up in law in the EU treaties, first in the area of environmental protection. And today the Court of Justice in Europe says that it is a general principle of law. It is a principle basically of foresight and of technology assessment. And you had this in the US, you had the US Office of Technology Assessment in Congress, a very, very important institution, but it was done away with by Ronald Reagan at the time when he was president. I don't know whether it was done by him, but it was during his reign. I have written a paper which is called Constitutional Democracy and Technology in the Age of AI, published by the Royal Society in the UK last year, October, where I said based on this principle of precaution, we need 3 levels of impact assessment of this new technology. First, we need the political impact assessment. That's what's happening now. Lawmakers, governments must make up their mind and start to understand this technology and its implications. Second, we should oblige by law each developer, each company which develops AI and then puts it on the market to do an impact assessment. And impact assessment means 360 degree, how does it touch individual rights, how does it touch society, democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights, safety, sustainability, ecologically, and so on. And third, we need a right for the individual to understand how this technology impacts him or her. So 3-level impact assessment, I would say, should be required by law. In Europe, basically in GDPR, it is required whenever there's personal information involved. So yeah, that's the precautionary principle in a nutshell. I think there was a question here. Yeah? Okay, yes?
In your opinion, where do you think the burden lies when it comes to regulators, policymakers, business professionals, academics, especially as GDPR comes to light, right? So with GDPR, it's a question of, when you're scrolling through Netflix and you're given a recommendation, nobody thinks twice. It's almost a happy surprise. But if it's healthcare data, if it's the pregnancy piece that you were talking about, sometimes it takes a while for consumers to have the light bulb go off. Look, well, this is not convenient necessarily, but it's actually troublesome. So who pushes the envelope further, and then how does everybody collaborate to actually make a difference in the world around us?
Yeah, I have become increasingly pessimistic about the ability of individuals to avail themselves of their rights. I think individuals need the rights, even if they don't avail themselves, they need them. But I am convinced that you always have to make sure that in addition to individuals, in these very sensitive areas where there's a huge complexity and also huge intransparency in data protection, we don't know what the state is doing with the data. Big state, that's the risk side of our paper, has to admit. What is the state doing with this great data center? Very risky, this whole centralization. But also big companies, what are they doing with the data? We don't know. And therefore you need, in addition to giving individuals rights, you need public authorities or public enforcement systems and rights for NGOs, for example, to bring in class actions. So it's never sufficient in these critical areas of public interest to only dole out individual rights. So you need institutional, let's say, add-ons and certainty, at least to some respect. The system will never be perfect. And of course, all law is an allocation of risks and opportunities in society. And so I would always tend to give, let's say, more burden to those who make much money with the technology. They have to carry also the bigger part of the burden in terms of burden of proof. We are complying, everything is fine. But also in terms of burden of investment in public interest.
The microphone?
Thank you for your very, very interesting and thorough talk. So part of the bedrock core DNA of Silicon Valley is this notion of iterating, and you hear the term often, fail fast. And this is fueled by enormous concentrations of wealth and incentives. And so given the complexities that you have elaborated so clearly, how do you, without creating a very complex set of laws and regulations, how do you counter this enormous push to try things out, see if they break, and then do it again, iterate? How do you do that?
Yeah. So, first of all, one reason why I come to America is that I'm convinced, many of those big issues of how we're going to live in the future will be solved in America. For that reason you just mentioned. Because the money, the technological capacity is here, and this whole discourse is about how you will live, first of all. And for us, every issue which is solved in America is good. Yeah? And the more issues are unsolved in America, the more problem we also have. Now, first thing I would say, and I say this knowing that I discussed here with MIT colleagues and so on, we cannot apply the engineering view of the world of perfection to regulation by law. It is normal that laws are not as complex as the realities. Laws have to simplify, they have to typify. It is also normal that they are not perfect because in democratic process, alone for that reason, you must make compromises to get majorities. And so, to talk about the law as if it's a code, it's a huge mistake because it insinuates the law should be as well written as the code, which is user-friendly, you just push a button and everything is fine. No, laws are messy. And everybody who requires otherwise, and these easy sentences like, we'd rather have no law than a bad law, typical Silicon Valley speech, is anti-democratic because it always leads to having no law. So I would say first, the bar on perfection, let's be realistic. Second, let's make technology neutral regulation. It is not right to say the law must update as fast as possible, as fast as technology. We cannot, in democratic process, have an update 01, 02, 03 like we have for code every 6 weeks. And there's also a good reason why we don't need it. Because programs are written for stupids. Who are the stupids? The computers. Laws are written for human beings who can think themselves. So what does it mean to have a technology neutral law? It is a law which uses concepts like GDPR does, which change their real meaning in the real world with technology evolving and with business models evolving. The greatest technology neutral laws are our constitutions. They hold for hundreds of years. And their meaning evolves because judges give them legitimately new meaning as the world changes. So that's the second. And the third thing, I think, and that's probably the most challenging in democracy today, if you want to counter big money and the powers, as Hans Jonas already described them, the combined powers of technology development and capitalism, combined. Jonas said they brush away everything if we don't fight. The only way you can do it is by engaging. That's what democracy is about. I mean, you must make up your mind where you stand and what you do. If you stand on the side of the fatalists, including on the left, who say democracy can never do anything else than what the corporations want, well, that's your problem. I would say there's ample evidence that democracy can make a difference, even against very forceful powers of technology and capitalism and money combined. But to be able to do it, one needs a lively democracy, one needs parties which work, one needs to engage. There's no other secret sauce, I would say.
My question is about the domain and scope. Let's assume that we agree with everything. There's no reason not to. As I listen to this, if I go to university and I say, tell me about AI, we're going to talk about deep learning, machine intelligence, neural networks. As someone who had a 40-year career in software development, I've never met a module that didn't have human judgment in it. So, isn't this about everything? Or is it only, so how do you dimension the scope of all these things?
Yes. So that's what I said at the outset. The technology policy today, internet policy, but also AI policy, is actually societal policy because it pertains, first of all, to all walks of life, to all people. Everybody is concerned. And then I would say, we therefore need to think this policy as a societal policy. It's not a technology policy, it's a societal policy. We shape our lives deeply with this. It's about democracy, rule of law, human rights, and so on. But, of course, things don't end with the general laws and the general principles. In addition to the general, we need, as we have always done it in technology regulation, sector by sector specific rules. You have very detailed, medical appliances, medicine approval, financial markets, and so on. And this debate is still before us. I mean, I cannot say anything about it, but I can imagine that when you look closer into the sectors, there will be additional complexities with AI which have to be mastered, like they have been mastered in all past technologies which we have put on the world. The internet is an exception and software are exceptions in the terms of how under-regulated they are. Normally, technologies and markets have been pretty strongly regulated by law, and actually I would say, let's go back to the normal. This whole discourse that the law cannot work anymore, it's too slow, and so on, I think it's very interest-driven. It disables democracy, it ignores the capabilities of making technology neutral laws which hold for a long time into the future. And it has allowed these big companies to be, amazingly irresponsible and still very popular. That is the amazing thing of the internet giants.
Thank you.
So I have a comment for the meeting rather than a question. As background, I direct the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT that studies how digital and physical relate. One of my students, Jason, built and runs all the computers at Facebook. One of my students, Rafi, built and runs all the computers at Twitter. And it's because I taught them to not believe in computer science, but understand the physics. And in fact, Rafi just stepped down from rebooting the DNC's computing for security. The reason I mention all of that is to identify something that I think is missing in this discussion, which is I worked once removed with Turing and von Neumann and the founders of machine intelligence, and the last thing both studies is how digital becomes physical. So von Neumann studied self-reproducing automata. Turing studied morphogenesis, how genes give rise to form. The research in my lab is doing things like how do you create synthetic life in the Star Trek replicator and self-reproducing machines. And all of that is AI, but it's AI not in the cloud, but embodied physically. And it has a very immediate implication, which is we began an outreach project from that, setting up community fabrication labs that let you go from digital to physical. Those have gone viral, they're doubling exponentially. There's over 1,500 now, they double every year and a half. Very strong concentration in Europe. There's a bill coming in the House and Senate for universal access to them. And so in many of the places where there's so much attention to income inequality, import, taxation, all of the issues everybody's talking about, what that's missing is an assumption that computing is in the cloud and work is jobs, is money, is production at the end of long supply chains. When you cross from digital to physical, it really doesn't end around that. So for example, we're working with a group of cities around the world that started in Barcelona, where there's great design sense, but 50% youth unemployment, where they're deploying digital fabrication as part of urban infrastructure. So if you live in a city, you can produce what you consume. A growing number of cities around the world are signing up to this. It's really a third digital revolution. First was communication, then computation. This is now fabrication. It's a revolution happening not where all the attention to AI is happening, but all the research behind AI is leading to it. And so it's the observation that this whole discussion is missing an opportunity to directly impact what you eat, how you build shelter, what you consume by segregating AI to something that happens in the cloud. Some of the most exciting impacts and some of the most exciting research is on going from digital to physical. It really is a revolution, but it's sort of out of sight for a lot of this discussion.
I can only say thank you, and maybe it should be added to the paper. I mean, because this is of course a very important remark. I was not even aware of this mega trend. You describe it as a mega trend. So thank you very much for the remark, and maybe the authors can take up a few sentences, because as you say, by coming back to the physical, if I understand you correctly, it's a very important contribution to work, labor, but also, you know, real living conditions, as you say, food and so on.
Just to respond to Megatrend, it's one very strongly so. So an early mentor for what I'm doing on this was with Gordon Moore, who of course did Moore's Law. If you look at the data for what I'm describing for this now digital fabrication scaling, there's another thing like Moore's Law called Glass's Law, but there's more data than when Gordon Moore had. This is roughly a decade of exponential scaling. And in fact, Vint Cerf is really working with us on a part of a corner of it. So it really is a trend, not as a projection, but just as data in the present. But the challenge I would give all of you is an awful lot of what government does you don't need in this world. And a lot of what government isn't doing you do need in this world. And in particular, a lot of authority in the world where anybody can make anything comes from soft power and lateral alignment, not top-down control. And so it really requires revisiting a lot of the assumptions I heard so far today about what is governance.
Right. Any other
question?
Yes.
In the area of personal privacy, sometimes called the right to be forgotten, how do you balance that fundamental right to privacy with the need for people to know what public figures have done? Suppose there was a provocateur who had written extensively about suggesting genocide or ethnic cleansing. And he had written intemperately in his 20s, but now he's running for office. Should that person be able to insist that my past be forgotten and unobtainable? How do you separate out what we must have access to and what the things that I tweeted when I was in high school should disappear?
Yes. Very clear answer, no. This cannot be. So there is a long line of jurisprudence by the European Court of Human Rights which started much before the internet and which relates to press, namely to the question, the reporters are going after you and they start photographing you wherever you walk, and they photograph you in your garden, and they photograph you on the balcony, and you know, maybe with your girlfriend and so on. And how far is that justified, that intrusion into your life by press? And the criteria which the European Court of Human Rights developed, and there are hundreds of cases on this, for press is the legitimate public interest in a democracy. So, if there is a reason in a democracy to say, yeah, but people need to know, then you have no right, neither the journalists report about you to defend against that, nor the right to be forgotten. So the example you gave now is absolutely clear. I mean, you know, even if it was in the 20s, I would say if it was 14, underage, that it gets more difficult. But if it was in your 20s, and now today you are a candidate for public office, the answer is very clear. There is no right to be forgotten. So the right to be forgotten is very, very important for the many very normal people who have nothing to do with politics. The famous case decided by the European Court of Justice was about a Spanish man who had divorced and had not paid his alimonies, and there was therefore an order to confiscate his house and auction it by the state to get the alimony money basically back, which the state had outlaid for the woman. And this was 20 or 30 years ago. And he said, look, you know, now I've paid, this is 30 years ago, this was my private life, everything is okay now, I'm paying since ages, but my life is destroyed by the fact that every time somebody puts my name into Google, this comes up, you know, can't find a new girlfriend and so on. Yeah. So there the Court of Justice said that goes too far, this intrusion, there's no public interest about this guy. But the court said, it's of course different when there is a public interest in democracy, and it is also different when it's journalists who make the investigation, because freedom of the press is something that Google cannot avail itself of. So that is the line to draw. Not clear? No, it's not American, I know, but I think this is a long tradition of European press jurisprudence related to the press. I mean, we have had this discussion beyond the right to be forgotten about what to do about hate speech and incitement to violence on the internet. And I think my view is, I negotiated a code of conduct with Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on what they should be doing against hate speech and incitement to violence on the internet, is that if you don't do anything about incitement to violence and hate speech on the internet, you actually reduce the freedom of speech. Because in this age of the internet, there are many journalists, especially women, who start to become extremely trolled, and they get these remarks like, making terrible threats of rape and so on, whenever they publish something. And we even have in Europe, let's say, honorary mayors of small villages who step down because on the internet they are so put under pressure and hated with this. And we have an increase of 400% of political violence, against refugees, Muslims, but also anti-Semitism. And all this is not conducive to free speech. So I think the extreme incitements to violence and hate speech, it simply has to be forbidden to do this in the public space, because if you don't do it, if you allow the scums who do it to speak freely, it means many others will not dare anymore to open and speak. And many will not dare to take public office, and many journalists will not dare to write anymore what they should be writing. So it's a different approach than in America, and I wish you good luck with your approach.
So we spent a bit of time talking about the rights of the citizen. But I think we should also spend a bit of time just thinking about the responsibilities of the citizens, and that every time that we rebroadcast something that may or may not be correct, we have a responsibility. And so in many items of ethics, be it hate speech or forwarding any information that is not substantiated, I think I hear very little warning of the citizen. And then I like to comment about the popularity of the internet giants. So I'm constantly confronted with people who complain about this stuff. And yet everybody orders from Amazon, everybody takes Uber, everything, because my privacy and my comfort, dominates. And I'm going to pick and choose what I feel to be ethical about. So I might be a vegan, but I'll take, Uber all over the place. So I wish that our global leaders would tell us that we're responsible for the world that we're creating.
Yeah, I think you are of course right. And I would underwrite everything which calls on the responsibility of everybody. And then the next thing is, let's do more education in the schools. All this is correct, but it's not sufficient. And it is an easy way out for those who don't want to take the measures which are necessary and which go beyond. Because, nobody has a problem, and especially not the big corporations in their profit models have a problem with big education is done, and individuals should be responsible in using the technology and so on. These discourses are right, but they are not sufficient, and they are used proactively to deflect attention from the more hard laws which we need. It's a classic lobby thing to say, yes, but before we do this law, let's first do education. And there I would say, of course we have to do education, and we have to do responsibility realizing of individuals, but it's not sufficient.
So my comment was not, and I misspoke, that's not how I meant. I didn't mean it as an instead, I meant it as absolutely fundamental also. Because the problem, if you do not have the also, so then I sit around saying, well, the state is taking care of all this.
Yeah.
And then that's all me and my responsibility. And then I think we are back to the totalitarian
Absolutely.
state model. So I think it's as fundamental to democracy as good jurisprudence.
Quick question. So let's say I'm a user of Facebook and I set up an account and they ask me if I agree to the terms. And it may be thousands of pages, but ultimately I agree.
Yeah.
Why would any regulatory agency or anybody else have any right to change the agreement I had? And I'm sure they've used that argument.
Yes, and they will. So this is maybe, I don't know how American law is. So we have two bodies of law in Europe which make a difference in this context. The first body is called the laws on standard contract clauses. So these are unnegotiable. You know, you just have to sign, here's a small thing. So in case of such clauses, if they are unfair or surprising, they are void ex officio. That means a judge looks at them and just says, come on guys, you know, this is not okay, this is not okay, this is not okay. In this way, by having a law which says this, we have a directive in Europe which says this, you basically create the consumer trust which is necessary, because otherwise people would really feel, oh God, you know, I have to read this all the time and I trust nobody anymore. So that's the first body of law which protects people against these clauses containing things which are, to say it simply, not okay. The second principle is specific to data protection, and we already had it in the Directive on Data Protection of 95, and now again in the GDPR, and it says basically the consent must be informed and specific. And you know, there are lawyers, hundreds, maybe thousands of lawyers, who try to make their money from writing in such a way that it's as unintelligible as possible, but when they go to court, they can say, yeah, but this was informing and it was specific. So this is what the litigation is about. And often, not always, but often the courts come to the conclusion that these long clauses are not informing people, and they are not sufficiently specific. But if they are, then you're right, nobody can say anything about it.
But particularly in the case where if in the contract itself allows you clear options on your own personal data.
Yes, if it's clear and specific and informed, it's okay. By the way, not for the state. The state can never abuse consent as a legal base. The state always needs a law for data processing. That's also very important. Only for private parties. Right. I see, it's like, you know, when I played in the school band, we started with a full audience, and then at the end of the concert, you know, three people left. So, okay, now I don't want to.
Here, I have another question. So I represent, so I consult for a company that is started in the UK and just automated complex decision making. Different from RPA solutions, it's less task oriented, but really harnessing complex decisions that humans make. And it's knowledge map based, so it is humans or subject matter expertise are codifying their own knowledge in that, making it available at scale. We work with a variety of different sectors, and obviously it's community-based, and it's explainable and transparent, right? So you could, if you know, regulators come knocking, you can go in and say, well, the certainty factor is this, because you can go in and map out exactly why those decisions are made. We're very strongly working with different policymakers, going into discussions with regulators and whatnot, but we have this issue where the big companies obviously are front row. They're talking about transparency and sometimes creating some noise around it, right? What would your advice be around, you know, small fish who are trying to make an impact, trying to make a difference, have arguably an innovative technology, but I mean, how do we get a seat at the table to even make an impact if that's the desire?
Well, I think if you look around in the UK and Ireland and also the US, there's a number of small companies which are competitors of the big guys in their field or in adjacent field, who are extremely active in terms of trying to directly have policy dialogues, but also they orchestrate complaints against the big companies, whether competition complaints, you know, abuse of dominant position would be a classic. You know, in search, Google has 95% dominance in Europe. So, you know, if you have something to say, you have to say it to a competition authority, say it to the European Commission. The other thing is complaints in terms of data protection, complaints to data protection authorities. You know, if you find a citizen who you can convince that there is abuse illegality, and your business model would show, would not have this illegality, that's what they do. That's the technique. But, again, there's no golden bullet in an economy and in a society where you have a few very, very strong players. That is always a problem, as America and Europe knows from history. Right. Thank you very much.
So we'll wrap here in a couple of minutes, but I do want to call, Quan has a few remarks to make. Elliot, would you like to talk a little bit about Washington for a minute or two, at some point or two? Sure. Okay, yeah, Quan first.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Tom. You can see today Governor Michael Dukakis came here because of the health problem. But that doesn't make us think about how we can engage our great people join discussion, because with great people always busy and not so easy to engage on the day or time. So by that reason, Boston Global Forum and Governor Michael Dukakis discuss and make the format AI Also Society Summit. That means we start from today, AI Also Society G7 Summit conference, but we will continue discuss by online and continue receive, comment, discussion, and talk by video, by online. We will start the model, new model, and we look forward our people here will talk, discussion by online, and we will post a section AI Also Society Summit. Our paper today, we continue to discuss, and I hope we get great ideas, and we can collect in later July. That is our new format. And Governor Michael Dukakis will send a letter, introduce and call for our people and leaders. So far, some leaders of government and leaders of civil society and top leaders will invest and talk with us in this model. And you can see that the research is that is the first for AI WS Summit in the video here. So that model we do. And thank you so much for your great team. And also Governor Michael Dukakis would like to deliver a message that is the world AI today. We need to align many resources in the world to make the world peaceful, safe, and new democracy. And we, together with the World Leadership Alliance Club in Madrid, to continue to develop and work for initiative, and also AI Also Society Summit. Yeah, so thank you so much, and we continue to talk.
So I'm just going to take a couple minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Juan. Great presentation. Well, amazing. So some of you may have been in previous discussions here at the conferences with Mike Dukakis. And last year, they contacted us. I produce, I'm the chair of AI World, and now a new event with Dukakis Global Forum, AI World Government. And I think the discussion that we just had, particularly with a gentleman, I think he might have left, talking about new ways of thinking about AI governance, has been in the middle of the evolution of the AI industry. I've been in it for over 25, 30 years. It's always been in the background, and since GDPR and the efforts of the European Commission and so forth, the last few years has just seen the world kind of explode around privacy and explainability and bias and trust. And what we've done is we produce AI trends, and I created a few years ago, it's now one of the largest AI commercial events in the world, AI World. But last year, in our collaboration with Dukakis Global Forum and production of some publications on cybersecurity and AI ethics. We felt as a publishing company, we could really help. Very powerful speech. Powerful message. I was just going to try to amplify the essence, and obviously that read my mind. But our goal is to try to amplify everything that's happened here this morning. So what we announced last in December at the conference here was that we were going to produce a summit on AI governance, big data, and ethics in Washington, D.C. at our AI World Government event. Mike Dukakis Global Forum is an international sponsor, as is the Canadian government. We have the gentleman who wrote, Lord Clement Jones, who wrote the ethics for the UK. Hopefully, France will join us, and we have the IEEE and just a number of people who participate here. Nosley is one of the speakers, Mark Rottenberg, a lot of the people who are in the circle here at Harvard and MIT, as well as vendor. We're trying to bring everybody together. So the idea of trying to bring industry, bring researchers, bring nations together in a discussion to help accelerate it, particularly with the National Security Commission on AI that we're working with, and VinSurf is part of that, people-centered computing. So we're kind of in the middle of so many exciting things happening right now that, building these conferences are great because we can get everybody here and maybe have, 1,000 people together and just help spread the word and accelerate the great messages that are you've heard this morning. So we have some brochures I read literally right off the press. So if you want one, I have one right here. If you want to give me a card, happy to send you a brochure. And I hope to see you in June. So thank you very much.
Elliot, thank you. Well, thanks again to the Consul General, to Paul, for those wonderful, thoughtful, far-reaching. And thank you all for spending time with us this morning. And we'll see many of you back in September for our next Boston Global Forum conference. Thank you.